Hey, teacher trainees. So today we walked the long, narrow road down the Yamas and niyamas, the first two limbs of the 8-limb system of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And what we're dealing with here is the restraints, the outward restraints and the inward restraints of the practice. And we begin with Yamaha. Yamaha relates to, we have Yama and niyama, and Yama is an intensifier, so it's the greater restraints. And this, to begin with, to kind of frame this from the beginning, we already know that these first two limbs are a part of the 8-limb system of yoga. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Of course, we begin with ethical standards, and as I said in our previous talk, the ethical standards might be seen as the main road. But in this tradition, they're not the main road. They are what sets us up to take the road to begin with. So they're the initial sets of probities or situations you want to create for yourself so that your relationship to yourself, to your internal world and to your body and to the outer world and your social relations don't interfere, don't get in the way of your practice. Don't confuse your mind, don't clog your mind so that it is confused by problems or disagreements internally. So the first set of rules that we encounter are called Yamaha. And we'll pick apart for a moment what this term Yamaha means and where it comes from. And it's kind of cool because it gives us an extreme, the absolute polarity from which we would measure any restraint in human discourse or human relationships. And it gives us that because Yama means death. Yama is the Lord of death. And the ultimate limit of every human life, of course, is its death. And it's merely because we have death in human life that restraints are necessary. If we had no death, there would be no need for restraint. We would be immortal, we would be invincible, nothing would ever stop us from behaving in any part, any way or any part. But because we are finite, because we are limited, because we have mortal life, because we have Yama, because death occurs, there must be Yamaha. There must be some limit in this life that we undertake if we are going to make this limited energy that we have and limited time on earth that we have flow appropriately. We live in a world of limits. So ethics reflect that. They reflect that we are in a contentious atmosphere. We live within the limits of our own body. We live within the limits of our own society, and we must negotiate that to move forward. So ethical standards help to channel our energies. And that's no different here in the yoga path. In fact, if anything, it's more critical in the yoga path. It's more critical because this is a science of energy. It's a science of life force, and that life force is directed towards this very high and difficult goal of attaining ultimate consciousness. Okay, so the first yama that we begin with is ahimsa. And we're aware of ahimsa as a general value because of the struggles of Mohandas Gandhi, because of his attempt to use nonviolence as actually a tool in social conversation and social change. But of course in the context of yoga, because it's an internally aimed practice, it is not utilized for outward experience so specifically. Ahimsa is nonviolence, it is non-harming, and the process that it attempts to characterize for us is the way in which we export violence outside of us to avoid the consequences of the violence inside of us. So yoga is a process, in a way, of turning the sharp knife of investigation inward. So there is a certain violence to it, and the violence comes in confronting the dangers of your own personality rather than moving with those dangers, exporting them outward and committing violence outward. So I might be so mad at my photographer here that I would grab him by the scruff of the neck. And that would be himsa, that would be violence. But if I felt that impulse and I coped with it and I integrated it and I transcended it in my personality, that would be ahimsa. Yeah? I would have learned to work with my own violent impulses, and I would have not avoided dealing with them by exporting them outward. So in this sense, ahimsa in the yoga tradition has a very specific meaning.
I just found what you were saying very interesting.
Okay, I'm filming, but I appreciate.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps another time. So,
super good.
thank you.
Look at the sunset, right? Namaste.
Namaste. So the next yama that we deal with is satya. So satya we also know from the conversation with Mahatma Gandhi, the great man Gandhi, and because he called his practice satyagraha, grasping for the truth. So satya is this quality of being in line with the rhythm of our experience. Satya comes with this word sat, which means all. So there's a suggestion that we are aligned with the all in all, and that even relates back to previous concepts that we've talked about in terms of the universal rhythm, the urta, on which this Sanatana Dharma, the great teaching of Hinduism, aligns itself with. Dharma and urta are similar terms. The rhythm of the universe and the foundational moral code of the universe are the same. So when we come to satya, this idea of the all in all, aligning with the all in all, is a part of the concept of being in truth. You speak to the nature of reality as it actually is. You don't attempt to allow yourself to fub the details, because if you do, you step out of that same rhythm of transformation. So in ahimsa, it's that same quality, exporting my inner violence to the outside to avoid the consequences of the inner conflicts. And in satya, it is an avoidance of the actual dialogue that is internally felt. Pretending that that dialogue is not actually happening, pretending that the outside reality, its actual effect on me, is something that I'm not going to truthfully report. When we stay in line with the truth, reality is able to have its grip on us. It's able to exercise the changes that it must exercise on us. Honesty is something that confesses of the outside powers that control our lives. And it is attempting to dodge those that we have dodged the truth. So if we stay in line with that evolution, we stay in line with the growth patterns which yoga attempts to enhance. So the third one we come to is asteya. The sun has just disappeared over the end of the horizon here, and it's funny, we call the planets the grahas. So eventually we'll come into this idea at the end of our list of a parigraha, which has to do with avoiding grasping. And asteya is a little bit like this concept of a parigraha. Asteya, of course, we might guess that it means non-stealing, and so it does, because it has a similar root. To steal in the yoga tradition is to avoid the act of stealing, is to take oneself out of the normal kind of market relationships in this larger experience of holding and attaining outward goods that is often a part of the life that is outside the life of the yogi. So the life of the yogi is not involved in trade. It's not involved in a way in taking anything from anybody. This is often a stricture that we get in other traditions. What the yogi should do, the yogi should not accept anything from anybody. And this is a similar concept. You should not think that anything outside of you will enhance the path that you are on. The path that you are on requires nothing from the outside world. There is a certain quality of containment in your inner experience that will not be enhanced by any material good. If you get into that path of mind, if you think, oh, if I have that car, my life will be complete, then it is an erroneous thought. So in the extremity of the yoga path, we eschew holding any goods because we know that goods do nothing to change our ultimate consciousness. So we walk through ahimsa, we walk through satya, we walk through asteya, and the fourth one is perhaps the most difficult of all. It's brahmacharya. And here, as we stand among this group of people, we see couples walking, and that natural relationship is the round that we find ourselves in everyday life. And we balance out our personality with brahmacharya. In the absence of brahmacharya, we balance our lives out by finding an other in which I can experience, in my case, my femininity as opposed to my masculinity, or if I was a more feminine person, my masculinity outside of myself. We find that other side of the duality of our actual gender identity. And so, in a way, it saves us from having to find that integration within the self. So, brahmacharya has that suggestion around the way the personality arranges itself in its ultimate integration, but it has a further suggestion in the yoga tradition in that it's about conserving power. Life force, vitality, is expressed in its purest form in sexuality. So when we come to brahmacharya, the ideal of brahmacharya is that sexuality is contained so that energy can be used for transcendence. And when we get into the later tradition, this whole science of how we contain vira, how we contain the certain potent energy of sexuality and channel it up through the energetic system of the body, will be plotted in a very exact way. But in the point of the tradition, at this point in the tradition, in the late 5th century, in the discussion of the Yoga Sutras, it's a little bit of a different formulation. It's mainly holding yourself out from the confusion of sexual relationships. Yeah? Holding yourself out from wasting that power and getting into entanglements that sexuality leads to. So again, Yamaha, it's an outward restraint. It's dealing with our relationships with others. It's telling us that we should practice abstinence. In our modern context, in our modern everyday life, as we are householders kind of experiencing yoga, it would be a different kind of plot, a different kind of plan, because we're probably not going to let go of relationships to others, members of the opposite sex or otherwise, and we're not necessarily going to let go of sexuality. But in that case, we would take this in a more limited way. We would say, I practice brahmacharya to a limit. I'm not foolish with my sexual energy. I apply it in a way in which it can be contained in a healthy relationship. So we can adapt these rather extreme measures to our householder life, our modern householder life. And then the last of the Yamahas is called a parigraha. And as I said, we come back to this idea. I said the planets are called the grahas. Sun is like a graha, a great grasper. And that, of course, comes from Jyotish astrology. We're aware that these energies of the planets grasp at us, and they have some effect on our lives, the energies of the great planets. A parigraha is kind of an interesting term. Pari means to turn, and apari means not to turn. So it means not to turn towards grasping. Yeah? So often we can amuse ourselves with ideas of what we might want. I can sit with a magazine and I can flip through it and I can see pictures of cars and pictures of houses and maybe pictures of people that I would like to desire to pull into my house, pull into my life, my larger life. And aparigraha means to turn away from this kind of activity, to turn away from lust, basically, to turn away from imagining that if I could pull something into my life, or if I could vibrate, or if I'm vibrating with something that's not in my life, that is going to serve me. It pulls, those kinds of activities pull me into fantasy. They pull me out of my actual lived experience. If I can imagine I can have that, I can imagine I can have this, especially in the horizontal plane, it pulls me away from that vertical work of transcendence. Yeah? If we took a parigraha into a positive direction, we could say that a positive grasping would be to grasp towards enlightenment. We must become, the self must evolve, but the question that yoga addresses is how should it evolve? Should it evolve towards self-actualization or self-realization? In the extreme yoga path, the yoga of the Shramanas, the yoga of the Yoga Sutras, it is self-realization that is first and foremost. When we get into Tantra, we're going to have a wider expression of what yoga can be, and we'll include this process of self-actualization in this material plane, what I can become in human society. But for Yoga Sutras, it's about self-realization. So aparigraha, this working my mind to grasp at fantasies in this horizontal plane, what might enhance my health, wealth, love, and happiness, my everyday satisfactions, that's not in the cards for the extreme yogi. So in our limited life, we would apply it in a similar way. Be careful of your lusts. Be careful of your covetousness, as we might say in the Ten Commandments. Control your wanting, and then you'll have more energy for your work on the yoga.